This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.
This episode is part of a long series exploring how some evangelicals tied themselves to the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s. Now that our big topic is nearing its end, I want to revisit some of the characters from the season to see where they landed. This episode can stand on its own, but may make more sense if you go to my episodes about Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. This is Where the Gang Ended Up, Part 1. Santa Fe Springs sits between downtown Los Angeles and Disneyland. Beaches to the west, mountains to the north, and deserts to the east. Also located there, a rusting oil refinery. In 1998, an entrepreneur swooped in and bought it and tried to get it going once more. But the resurrection of this refinery became something out of an Ayn Rand novel. The factory had been a major polluter. People living there did not want it around anymore. Environmental groups blocked it. The California Department of Labor sought restitution for former employees. The EPA got involved. Listen, oil refineries are gross. You wouldn't want one in your neighborhood. The roadblocks kept coming. By the end of the debacle, the charitable trust run by the entrepreneur lost an estimated $60 million on the plant, which didn't open. The entrepreneur is someone you might not expect to be in the oil business. A prosperity gospel preacher, televangelist, and political activist named Pat Robertson. As hard as it is for us to admit, ministry takes money. To run a big organization like a television network or radio station, to host rallies or do speaking tours, all that is expensive. Last season I talked about the D.L. Moody model, where preachers are encouraged to grow their ministries until they cover every possible medium. Radio, television, books, audio sermons, conferences, universities, primary schools, marriage counseling, direct mailings, on and on and on and on. That compulsion is still with us today. Even small local churches are expected to be soup kitchens, shelters, cover race and gender issues, educate children, marry and bury, organize small groups, operate as an event venue, illuminate politics, preach the gospel, send missionaries, teach budgeting, and so much more. Our desire to grow means we sometimes get too big for our britches, or get involved in unrelated diversions like Robertson did with his oil refinery. Speaking of diversions, Robertson's ambition didn't stop at TV, or a side business like oil. For guys like Bill Bright and Pat Robertson, serial entrepreneurs, leadership, ownership, can become almost a sacrament. Pat had his eyes on the biggest leadership role of all, the presidency of the United States. He and his religious right cohort believed change had to come from the top down. If America was going to be a moral nation that also believed in extra-biblical stuff like small government and low taxes and kept destroying the third world for its own profit, in their minds, it needed to take over the government. But the end of the 1980s was a tough time to be a televangelist, as preacher after preacher was caught with their pants down. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Starin, and this is Truce. The religious right had backed a horse. They'd supported Reagan for president, many claiming he was a moral Christian. But really, he was a divorced Hollywood star, someone who'd slept around, rarely went to church, consulted a medium, didn't know what it meant to be born again until his campaign got him a tutor. And he had a problem with the truth. Like in 1985, when he claimed that he didn't have cancer.
I didn't have cancer. I had something inside of me that had cancer in it, and it was removed.
So, he had cancer. Then there was the Iran-Contra debacle, where he and his administration illegally traded weapons for hostages with Iran. They ballooned the national debt, failed to strong-arm Congress into passing an amendment for prayer. Any number of examples. While Falwell claimed that he might be the greatest American president ever, Reagan left others unsatisfied. For example, Pat Robertson struggled with his quote-unquote voodoo economics and Reaganomics. Here is historian Daniel K. Williams, author of God's Own Party.
So at the end of the Reagan administration, I think there was a feeling among people like Falwell of gratitude for Reagan, but also some degree of frustration. That degree of frustration prompted Pat Robertson actually to launch his own presidential campaign, his bid for the 1988 Republican presidential nomination.
In March of 1985, an article dropped in the Saturday Evening Post, where people gushed about a potential run from Robertson. You may remember Pat Robertson as the founder of the Christian broadcast network CBN, the Pentecostal host of the 700 Club, and a political organizer, member of the Council for National Policy. He was at a lot of key meetings where religious leaders jumped ship from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan and decided to link evangelicals to the GOP. Now, some of that political excitement was aimed at him.
Among potential candidates today, political or non-political, there is no one with a higher rating in education, experience, family background, name recognition, popularity, and vigor.
That was an actor portraying, of course, Paul Weyrich, one of the architects of the New Right and a friend of Robertson's. This article was, according to Pat, the start of his campaign, and the New Right guys rallied once again, as they had for Reagan. William F. Buckley Jr., founder of National Review, came out in support of him.
He is running an unusual, intelligent, and methodical campaign.
And also stated that Robertson
hasn't a prayer.
So maybe he wasn't super confident, but Robertson had a lot going for him. He had a TV audience and political organization. At first, Robertson leveraged his nonprofit, the Freedom Council, which he created to get evangelicals involved in politics. But there were concerns that it would violate campaign finance laws by coming out for one politician. So he closed the group in September of 1986. Still, Buckley's negative prediction proved to be premature. A poll done via telephone on Firing Line ranked Robertson as the most serious challenger to Vice President George H.W. Bush. In the Iowa caucuses, he came in second place, behind Bob Dole. He was gaining speed, which surprised some people. His platform was in line with the New Right.
Denounce the Warren Court.
Cut funding to the United Nations.
Lower taxes.
Smaller
A
government.
balanced budget amendment to the Constitution.
Abolish the Department of Education.
A return to the gold standard.
Robertson also believed that borrowing money, either for personal reasons or for governments, was immoral, neglecting to mention that he borrowed heavily for his business enterprises. Then there were the controversial opinions. In a 1985 broadcast of the 700 Club, Pat told his audience that only Christians and Jews were qualified to lead the government. At another time, he insisted that he would follow the Constitution, but cited Andrew Jackson to argue that elected officials could
ignore a Supreme Court ruling if they so chose.
Robertson believed the First Amendment only applied to the federal government, not the states. Funny, guys like him never say the same thing about the Second Amendment. Pew, pew. Pat Robertson was finding a base, but still had a lot of problems. Not just because of his fringe ideas. 1987 and 88 were bad years to be a televangelist running for office. For starters, another Pentecostal televangelist, Oral Roberts, went on camera claiming that if the audience didn't send him money, God was going to kill him. Then, news broke about Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, a story that eroded the already unsteady confidence Americans had in televangelists. If you'll remember, the Bakkers worked for Pat Robertson in the 1970s. Jim was one of the people who came up with the format for the flagship show, the 700 Club. They left to do their own thing more than a decade earlier. But now, with Robertson running for president, the link was remembered by the media. After leaving CBN, Jim Bakker founded his own network, PTL, or Praise the Lord. To learn more, I spoke with an author and historian.
Hi, so I'm John Wigger, a professor of history at the University of Missouri, And the title of the book is PTL, The Rise and Fall of the Evangelical Empire of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker.
Like Robertson, Bakker incorporated satellite technology into his organization. Jim and Tammy intended to build an empire, just as D.L. Moody had modeled. Only theirs included a theme park.
The television network raised enormous amounts of money and made Bakker a celebrity, not only in the U.S., but internationally. Their versions of the PTL show were on the air in 40 nations by the 1980s. And instead of simply expanding and continuing to develop the television concept, so to speak, for spreading the gospel, which is what a lot of the original employees at PTL wanted to do, he decided to create a Christian Disneyland on the North Carolina-South Carolina border, Heritage USA.
With bridle paths, amusement rides, a giant water park, hotels.
Bakker's followers absolutely loved it, but it sucked up more money than even the television network could supply.
Jim and Tammy did not have a healthy relationship with budgeting.
So in 1986, Heritage USA was 2,300 acres. PTL had 2,500 employees. A purported 6 million people visited Heritage USA in 1986. It had a 500-room hotel and another 500-room hotel under construction. It had what Bakker claimed was the largest water park in the world. You could go and attend a taping of the Jim Bakker show in a 5,000-seat studio. Nobody outside of Bakker's inner circle realized that all of it was leveraged to the point of collapse.
We'll talk about the collapse and how it impacted Pat Robertson after these messages. While you listen to the ads, why not share the show with your friends? Send a text to a buddy and let them know how much you like Truce. Okay, here come the ads. Hey everybody! I'm excited to announce that I'm running a 50% off sale for your first month of a new Patreon subscription. Patreon is a cool service that allows you to support the show and get bonus materials. That means more Truce, more in-depth content with authors, special behind-the-scenes looks, and whole audio stories not available anywhere else. Hurry, because this offer expires July 9th. To learn more, visit patreon.com/trucepodcast and use the offer code TRUCE2026. That's patreon.com/trucepodcast, and the offer code is TRUCE2026. All right, back to the show.
This message comes from the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. Have you wanted to improve your relationship, but you're running out of ideas, time, or even interest? I'm Krista Harden, the host of the Enneagram and Marriage podcast, and I've dedicated the last 2 decades of my life and career on couples research, integrating healthy faith practices with the best of marriage research and nuanced personality typing. Couples from all over the world are finding more value-centered joy and bringing healthy desire, love, and fun back into their bond together again or for the very first time as they work strategically and intentionally on repatterning their love in healthy ways. Join us on Mondays or Wednesdays to listen and learn more about how your life and relationship can truly thrive together.
Welcome back. Pat Robertson was hungry for the presidency, seeing Christians as a persecuted minority in the United States. He wanted representation for conservatives. Well, conservatives on the far right. But his campaign was plagued by a series of scandals, mostly perpetuated by his peers, including Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, 2 prosperity televangelists known for big shows of emotion and Tammy's extravagant makeup and clothing.
At the beginning of 1987, Bakker announced his biggest round of building projects ever, including this enormous Crystal Cathedral $100 million project, plus condos and a golf course and a miniature version of Jerusalem.
They were busy expanding, growing their empire. Then, in early 1987, the veil fell away. For starters, word got out that Tammy Faye was hallucinating. Her behavior had become unpredictable. She stumbled around, taking her clothes off in polite society.
Tammy had become addicted to prescription meds. something that in the aftermath of the opioid crisis, I think we can now all understand.
She entered treatment at the Betty Ford Clinic. Jim stayed by her side. But this revelation was only the beginning.
What, of course, nobody realized was that Bakker had had a sexual encounter with Jessica Hahn back in December 1980. And more people knew about it, and it would finally break in the news in March of 1987.
The Charlotte Observer published a series of shocking revelations. Jim Bakker had had an affair with a young church secretary, Jessica Hahn, 6 years earlier. She alleged it was rape, and the ministry paid $250,000 in hush money. This being an era where hush money paid to silence a sex scandal could erode conservative confidence in a public figure. But it didn't stop there. Jim also sexually exploited his male employees. I won't get into the graphic details, but obviously, homosexual activity wasn't going to fly. Even that wasn't the bottom. Their prosperity gospel stance required that they live high on the hog. Couple that with the endless entrepreneurial drive so many of these guys had, and it was a recipe for disaster.
PTL's finances were just on the brink of collapse.
PTL relied on a steady stream of new money to pay off old debts. If the cash stopped or slowed for any reason, the dominoes would start to fall.
So when Jim wanted to build the first 500-room hotel, the Heritage Grand Hotel, he could not get a loan because that would have involved opening their books up to banks, something that they couldn't afford to do because their books were a mess. So he came up with what was actually a brilliant idea, which is if 25,000 of his followers would give $1,000 each, that would be $25 million, which was the estimated cost at the time to build the 500-room Heritage Grand Hotel. Then they could build the hotel free and clear without any debt and a loan. And in exchange, he would give those 25,000 lifetime partners, as he called them, the right to stay 3 nights and 4 days at the Heritage Grand for the rest of their lives.
If he'd stopped there, the hotel would have been fine. Even if all the donors called in their reservations, half of the rooms would have been available for new paying customers. Enough to keep them afloat. No problem. You just need to know when to quit.
The problem was that it worked so well that once they got to 25,000 lifetime partners, Jim just didn't stop. They had sold more than 100% occupancy. Then he began to sell them for the towers, the Heritage Towers that they were in the process of building, and sold more than 100% occupancy in that. And then he began to sell them for all kinds of other housing that they said they were going to build on the campground, bunk houses and country mansions and all sorts of things. But they never saved enough of that money to actually build those buildings.
They used the influx for other projects, which is what we call fraud. Raising money for one goal and using it for another. After the fraud trial in 1989, it was revealed that he'd conned his followers out of $158 million and taken $3.5 million for himself.
Jim was charged with 25 counts of fraud, wire and mail fraud, and conspiracy. He went on trial in federal court in 1989. And for Jim, that trial was a disaster. He did not prepare well for the trial. He hired an aging celebrity attorney who did not represent him well. And at the end of the trial, the judge, Robert Potter, whose nickname was Maximum Bob, sentenced Bakker to 45 years in prison, which I think shocked everybody. People quipped that he'd gotten 45 years for overbooking a hotel. Eventually, he had his sentence reduced twice, and he ended up serving about 5 years before his release.
The PTL world was collapsing. Jim Bakker, a charismatic preacher, reached out to an unlikely ally, the fundamentalist Jerry Falwell.
I think the thing that made Falwell attractive to Bakker was that he knew he needed to keep fundraising going. He needed a celebrity who was capable of drawing in viewers and, in fact, drawing in a new viewer base, because they were likely to lose some of their base after the Jessica Hahn scandal broke. So he needed a high-profile person who could instantly step in and keep the fundraising going.
Even though he was not a prosperity preacher like them, but rather a fundamentalist, Falwell consulted his peers. According to a television interview he did later, they agreed that if PTL were to collapse, it would affect all of them. Taking over might be enough to stop plummeting trust in Christian media.
PTL was on the brink of financial collapse. They were $65 million in debt. They were losing $2 million a month. That was not something he expected. He also did not expect that Bakker's personal failings would extend as far as they did. At that time, all he knew was sort of Bakker's side of the story about Jessica Hahn, but he didn't know about Bakker's same-sex affairs. He didn't know about a lot of the other things that eventually convinced him that Jim Bakker was not someone he could work with.
The Bakker family claims that Falwell took advantage of them and the moment to seize control. That is difficult to prove or disprove.
It's hard to understand why he would be there if he didn't intend to take something away from it. People would later claim that he was really after the television network. He was one of the few big televangelists that didn't have his own network, and this would have been a way to get one. But there's certainly no concrete evidence that he intended to do that.
So it's not something I can confirm or deny. Either way, Falwell, still involved in his own TV show, still leading a church, still with the moral majority, stepped in to save the PTL empire. All of this leads to maybe one of my favorite pieces of tape from the whole season. I truly wish I could play it here, but I'm too worried about copyright infringement. I'll do my best to recreate it. It was the same year as the scandal, 1987. A man in his 50s climbed to the top of a water slide in South Carolina, nervously chatting with the TV cameras. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. What are you reciting, the 23rd Psalm? 23rd Psalm and the Lord's Prayer and other things I know. Reciting prayers, making light of what appears to be a stressful situation. And yeah, this is Jerry Falwell. Help me, Doug. Help me, Doug. You got me into this. You're on your own right now. Oh, Doug. 3 years earlier, he was on the cover of Time magazine for his efforts in Ronald Reagan's re-election as President of the United States. He was a conduit that allowed political activists to tie evangelicals to the Republican Party. Important people appeared on his television program. Millions heard his voice and followed it. Now he was getting soaking wet. The jets below him cranking out hundreds of gallons of water per minute. And he did this water slide stunt in a full suit and tie, which is what makes this clip so incongruous. He looks like a Mormon missionary on spring break. His aides in a fuzzy green mascot tilted him back as if to baptize him. Well, 22 million. Was it worth it? Oh, it's cold. The $22 million he mentioned refers to the fundraiser that led to this moment, an attempt to save PTL. He does not look at ease, though he's cracking jokes and hamming for the camera. Then, accompanied by the sound effect of a cartoon slide whistle, he was on his way. He skidded across the water to the delight of the studio audience. According to the broadcast, Jerry Falwell plummeted 60 feet, 15 of which were in free fall. This was the Typhoon, a ride constructed as part of the theme park designed for the Bakkers. He emerged to join the press conference at the end of the pool. Can you imagine the fun on split-screen television news tonight with the distinguished Pope stepping off a plane from Rome and Miami, and this nut, this Baptist preacher coming down a water slide for $22 million? That was a really long fall from grace. Not only on the water slide, Falwell was trying to save a sinking ship. Really, several. In the end, even this publicity stunt could not stop the decline of PTL.
Falwell was only there for 7 months, realized that it was essentially insolvent, pushed it into bankruptcy. He was not happy with the way the bankruptcy judge allowed that to be restructured. So after 7 months, he just pulled out and left. And essentially, from there on, a few people tried to save PTL and save Heritage USA, but it was just headed for liquidation. Confidence in televangelists had been declining for several years, mostly because of their hard sell fundraising techniques. So Jim and Tammy didn't create sort of the negative image that came to predominate televangelism at the end of the 1980s. But certainly their fall, Bakker's subsequent fraud trial, was the most public event in that sort of reconceptualization of televangelism.
And there were more scandals on the way. More ministers caught in ugly affairs. We'll cover those in the next episode. The moral majority was not long for this world. Pat Robertson was still running for president, but all these scandals were nipping at his heels. Even though he was not caught in an inappropriate relationship himself, Jim and Tammy Faye were televangelists, his peers. Trust in media preachers was in sharp decline, just as he needed people to trust him. In the next episode, we'll see how these public falls impacted Robertson's presidential run, and how, despite some public setbacks, the far right of the religious world was able to pivot again. For now, you may be wondering, what happened to Jim and Tammy Faye after PTL?
While he was in prison, Jim and Tammy were divorced, and Tammy eventually remarried the developer who had built most of Heritage USA, Roe Messner. So they went their separate ways. The odd thing is that Tammy is the one that people still love. She had this sort of second act, especially as a kind of icon of the gay community. She did a talk show with an openly gay actor, Jim J. Bullock.
She became such a thing in the gay and lesbian movement that Elton John wrote a stage musical about her. It didn't last long on Broadway.
When he got out of prison, Jim wrote a couple of books in which he denounced the prosperity gospel, said he had been wrong for telling people that God wanted them to be rich and that he would never do anything like that again. But, people have a way of returning to their roots. And it wasn't long before he started a kind of copy of PTL and Heritage USA on a 600-acre complex outside of Branson, Missouri, in the small town of Blue Eye.
Before we go, let's circle back to the start of the episode, when Pat Robertson got involved in the business of an oil refinery. Maybe it highlights something we don't love to talk about in the Christian world: our obsession with entrepreneurs, of spreading and diversifying, of starting a program to address literally everything. Behemoth ministries like the Christian Broadcasting Network, or PTL, require a lot of money. If you want a Christian-themed amusement park, hotel, and vacation complex, it takes huge investments, which may be why Behemoth ministries attract the kind of people that they do: serial entrepreneurs who have numerous irons in the fire. There's something inherently unstable in the world domination model of ministry, in empire building. I doubt there's a magic formula, but the bigger we get, the more unstable we become. And the people who dream of empire may not be the kind of people who are necessarily good at knowing when to limit their growth. Is worshiping entrepreneurs the way to build our legacy? Or is it setting the table for a big slide? This episode used a lot of sources. Special thanks to John Wigger, whose book is PTL, The Rise and Fall of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker's Evangelical Empire. And thanks to the Teton County Library for loaning it to me. You didn't hear my whole interview with him. I got to chat with John a bunch more. Patrons of the show can hear more at patreon.com/trucepodcast. I'm also indebted to Francis Fitzgerald's The Evangelicals, David Edwin Harrell Jr.'s Pat Robertson, A Life and Legacy, Primetime Preachers by Jeffrey Haddon and Charles Swan, and a host of newspaper articles from that era. I'll do my best to list all the sources in your show notes and on the website. Thanks to everyone who gave me their voices for this episode, including Josh Griffith, Bob Stevenson, Kenneth Forte, and Chris Sloan. Mysteries sometimes get out of control, They get money hungry, seek too much power. I'm working hard to keep Truce on the right track. For me, that means not getting too big for my britches, staying humble, and trying to do things the right way. No Heritage USA, no hotels. Just a guy, a computer, and a microphone. But that still takes money. I'm doing this job full-time on a shoestring budget and would love to hire somebody to help someday. And next season is shaping up to be a big undertaking. We can still make it happen. Not so that we can take over the world, but so that more people can hear the call to return to the gospel instead of seeking earthly power. If you want to be a part of making that happen, visit trucepodcast.com/donate to learn how. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Starrin, and this is Truce.